Shout out to Sharp on Twitter for inspiring me to make this very quick video. Hopefully I have enough B-roll in the background to sustain my waffling. But essentially, I want to answer in my own way the question, what does PUBG need to do? First, we have to actually understand what that is in reference to. What does PUBG need to do? Well, I think it's in reference, most of the time, at least when it's asked, it's in reference to what does PUBG need to do to go back to its glory days? What does it need to do to introduce new players to the game and get players who haven't played in years to come back to it? What does PUBG need to do to become popular again? What does it need to do to become positive in the public eye? Right now, obviously, PUBG's reputation isn't super public in the public eye. So what does it need to do to get that back? And I think the way I've chosen to answer it is to focus on the three player bases. The first player base is the existing players, the hardcore players, the casual players, the ones that are interested in the game currently. Unfortunately, I think to answer this question, for the most part, at least when it comes to drastic changes, you need to ignore this player base. The existing players, the hardcore players, they'll play no matter what. They play because of the fundamentals, they play because of the gunplay, the movement, the battle royale experience. They're going to stay around no matter what you do, I think. So for the moment, at least to answer this question, I think we have to ignore that player base. The other two player bases, one is the returning players, so players who haven't played in years, who are coming back to the game after they've noticed a big update or something like that. And the third player base is the players who've never touched the game, completely new players. I think for PUBG, if we're speaking in context of what does PUBG need to do, it's focus on those latter two player bases. So the ones that haven't played in years and might want to try and come back, or the ones who haven't touched the game ever. There's only a couple ways I can see PUBG really succeeding in attracting more players as it stands right now. I think fundamentally the game's actually really great. I mean, that's no secret. The gunplay's phenomenal. I think the movement's fine, and the experience is obviously there, if not just a bit stale. So I think the routes it can go down, I only really see two. Obviously, this is a multi-layer question. It's not a simple black and white question. It's not something that can be answered. Simply, there are intricacies to it. There are layers to it. It's not easy to answer, but I think I can simplify it down, at least again in my opinion. Okay, so the two ways we can do it are consistent minor or medium changes over time to improve the game, change the game, and eventually attract players in a more consistent kind of incremental way. So essentially you're continuing to update the game and continuing to focus on attracting new players, but in minor, medium ways over a longer period of time. The second way to do it would be to change the game up drastically. I don't think PUBG is going to succeed in at least going back to the glory days ever, but I think it could achieve more success than it's currently experiencing with one of these two strategies. My personal opinion is that drastic changes need to be made. We'll get to that in a second. I don't think minor or medium changes are enough to continue to attract returning players. I don't think it's enough to attract new players into the game either, and it's certainly not enough to entertain the existing players. But no matter what strategy PUBG choose to go for in this context, the focus this is why I said we have to ignore the existing players, because I think obviously the focus needs to be on attracting new players and getting those returning players to come back. So whatever they do, they can't do that with a battle pass. They can't do that with a new map. They can't do it with new weapons. It needs to be something more, and the resources need to be spent on something that's going to bring players in and bring old players back. That's what the focus should be. It should not be about providing medium-sized new content. It should be about providing new experiences. It should be about providing something a bit more drastic to bring those players back and bring new players in. That should be the focus. That's why I said ignore existing players, because existing players will play no matter what. Battle passes, new weapons, things like that, doesn't really matter. They'll play no matter what. So I think we have to go with the secondary approach, the drastic changes. But even then, I think it needs to be something a little bit more fundamental in terms of accessibility for the game. I don't think it's going to be fundamental mechanical changes to the game. I think it needs to be a drastic change when it comes to access to the game. The thing that always comes to my head is modding. Modding is a fantastic way to attract not only modders to the game to share their creativity with the player base, but it's also it's a sign to everyone else that, okay, we've played PUBG before, we have any interest in PUBG, but this new game mode came out, or this new fun mode came out that we might actually have a ton of fun in, so it might be worth coming back to it. Something like that, and I'll get back to modding in a second, but something that is kind of extreme on the accessibility side, like limiting queues or limiting the experiences, potentially even changing the actual Battle Royale pacing as a whole. Right now, the games go for a decent amount of time, but what if they changed that so the games were a lot shorter, and you were kind of playing to entertain an audience on a much faster paced scale? Something drastic like that might actually bring players back in. I think when you look at multiplayer games in the market now, like look at Call of Duty, right? Warzone was fun for a while it came out. It died off, and even the introduction of new Warzone maps and mechanics, it didn't bring me back, and it obviously it didn't bring too many players back. It's kind of died off pretty significantly since it had its peak, right? And there's a reason for that. It's because an experience like that gets pretty stale after time. I think we've seen good incremental changes amount to success in games like No Man's Sky, where over time it's been made incredibly good through minor and medium, and then also sometimes major changes. But again, it took a long time, and then slowly the player base comes back, new players come in, and so a strategy like that might work. But I think for PUBG, I think it's in a bit of a different scenario. Okay, so back to modding. The example I'll use is Arma 2 and the DayZ mod. I think this is the clearest comparison that we could possibly make for this scenario. If you were around when the DayZ mod became popular, you'll know that Arma 2, the game that was modded for DayZ, was not very popular. Obviously, it was not a top seller on Steam. As soon as the DayZ mod came out, Arma 2 skyrocketed to the top of the Steam charts, Arma 2 Operation Arrowhead to be specific. And it was all because of this mod. And I don't think it's too crazy to say that I think that could happen again with PUBG. The only difference being that most people own PUBG now, whereas back then most people didn't own Arma 2. But of course, when you bring new players back into the game, you can monetize if PUBG wanted to do that, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, that would be kind of like, that's what comes to mind when I think of the accessibility, I guess, that modding would create for PUBG. I think it's a bit too late. I don't know if modding is going to have that big of an impact if it was to be allowed. I also don't think PUBG wants to allow modding. They said years ago that they would. Since then, it's never happened. I don't think that that's how they want to have this game progress. I think honestly it would be detrimental to the game modes and the game that exists right now, and I think probably if people made good mods, then the mods would be played more than the actual game. But I don't know if that's a bad thing, especially if PUBG is angling towards a sequel, a game that's going to do PUBG but better, or PUBG 2, whatever you want to call it. I think allowing people access to the API, allowing people access to the files to mod them, however it happens, I'm not a modder, but however they would do it, I think that would actually be a decent send-off to this game. And of course, I feel like it would bring a lot of players back and introduce new players to the game. So just think of the possibilities of modding. One of the reasons modding is so sought after in PUBG is because people know how fundamentally good the game is. If you had custom game modes that were actually well designed with PUBG's fundamentals, people would be interested. Survival games are one of the big ticket items, I think, for me when it comes to modding. Imagine a more faster paced survival on Erangel or Miramar or something like that. I think it would be really, really interesting to see how people would do a survival game with the access, or with the assets, that PUBG have. But again, if you exclude modding, drastic changes would have to be made on, again, I think it comes down to accessibility, it comes down to major content updates, things that change the game, things that are focused on attracting new players and making sure that the people who might be interested in returning are actually going to stick around. And that's going to require pretty drastic changes when it comes to pacing, accessibility, potentially even fundamentals. Obviously, you don't mess with the shooting, potentially you don't mess with the movement, but new maps, battle passes, new weapons, things like that, that's not going to do it. So, they need to think pretty damn out of the box if they were going to try and drastically increase their player base at all. Anyway, that's my take on this issue. Hope you enjoyed my waffling, and yeah, thanks very much for watching. I appreciate it, and see you later.